Well, it's Palm Sunday once again, and we finally get to gather to celebrate this event and this Holy Week. And we join Christians from around the world who are recounting today the horrific events of Jesus' crucifixion. It's a hard story to listen to. But we must hear it every year because it is the most important event in the history of the world. And this morning, I want to share with you some of its significance for us and the world. The day that Jesus was killed, so many powerful and dark forces converged on him. Think about it. Powerful religious leaders, the Roman Empire and the Roman army, a violent mob, and ultimately demonic forces that always seek destruction and death. And these kinds of forces continue to attack people the world over today. Just consider a sample. Right now, our Asian brothers and sisters are being mocked and attacked in this country. Georgia has just passed laws making it more difficult for our brothers and sisters to vote in the future. We're watching how weapons of war are being used to kill groups of people, most recently in Atlanta and Boulder, Colorado. And if you glance around the world, you can see nations like Egypt, Syria, China, just to name a few, whose governments regularly imprison and torture their own people. There is something seriously wrong with our world. And the question is, how can we respond to these powerful and destructive forces? A glance at history will tell you that we almost always meet oppressive forces with equal or greater force. And just watch a TV show, watch a movie, and you almost always see the good guys defeating the bad guys using powerful forces. I'm old enough to remember the original Superman TV show. And at some point, Superman would blast through some wall and save somebody. I'm also old enough to remember the original Batman cartoons and TV show. And the highlight of the TV show was when Batman would start to beat up whoever it was, the Joker or whomever. But just watch any movie. It's Luke Skywalker blowing up the Death Star. Any Marvel comic movie, Iron Man is really strong. Captain America is really strong. And in every one of these movies, you get the same story. Power and violence are needed to defeat evil. Yesterday's Washington Post had a disturbing story of two police officers who were called to a Silver Spring elementary school to deal with a 5-year-old boy who had walked off the school grounds. And the body cams of the police officers showed them screaming at this 5-year-old boy, threatening to beat him and put him in a cage, telling him he was horrible, and then even handcuffing this little kid. It seems that we have one default mode to deal with anything, and that is force and power. And this approach, while it does solve some problems, often creates many others. And let me tell you, I'm the first who wants, if I'm under threat or if I'm in danger, I want the police to come. I want protection. But this usual pattern stands in stark contrast to today's gospel. Just consider how strange and revolutionary this story is that we just read. And here's the title. I think the appropriate title for this story, this revolutionary story. Here it is. He saved others, but he couldn't save himself. Or, he rescued others, but he couldn't rescue himself. Here's what I'm talking about. If you open up the beginning of Mark's Gospel, you will find that Jesus is filled with the power of the Spirit. He goes into the desert and is powerful enough to resist the temptations of the evil one. He comes to Galilee, and out of power in the Capernaum synagogue, he frees the possessed man from evil. He goes and heals Peter's mother-in-law. And then at night, as people come to him, he uses his power to heal the sick and the suffering. He is a man of power. And that same power Jesus uses to gather scattered Israel, to begin to free them from the forces of evil and renew God's people. Most of the gospel is a story of Jesus as a person of great power. That is, until he's arrested in Gethsemane. When he's arrested, he suddenly becomes powerless. Hands tied behind his back, he's taken away through the Kidron Valley up to Caiaphas' house. He's conducted away by someone else. He's blindfolded and beaten. He's powerless against Pilate, that's for sure, and the professional torturers in the Roman army. And I can't think of being more powerless than being nailed to a cross, dying there naked as people mock you. Although being dead in a tomb is the most powerless state. And as Jesus progressively grows powerless during the Passion, the forces of injustice and fear and cruelty and death and evil itself become more powerful. But we believe that on that day, they actually lost. We believe that on that day, the forces of evil and idols and the powers were actually nailed to the cross. We believe on that day, the powerless one liberated us from all of these enslaving and destructive forces that plague our world. On that day, the forces of hostility and hate were actually killed. Here, my friends, is the real revelatory mystery of the cross. As Jesus grew powerless, the hidden power of God defeated the forces of evil and death. As Jesus grew powerless, God's new power to liberate us from the forces that seek to enslave and destroy us actually won. This is why St. Paul, at the beginning of his letter to the Corinthians, says, the cross is madness. It's foolishness. It's a scandal. But to those of us who have been called, it is the power of God, Paul says. And here's the real good news. In his powerlessness, Jesus entered into the dark forces that seek to hurt us and seek to get us to kill and hurt each other. And on that day, divine love actually won our freedom. And just as Jesus entered into those lynching and mob violent forces to free us, he can enter into our darkness. He can enter into our fears and our emptiness and our rage and our loss to free us from it. So my friends, I invite you this Holy Week to ask from the strange freedom that comes from the cross. I encourage you to imagine yourself standing before the cross, Christ hanging on it, and ask him for his freedom. Let that freedom change your relationships. Let it move you to stand with those who are being crucified. Let it move us to stand against all who seek to do to others what was done to Jesus. If we open ourselves to this freedom, boy, we will have a blessed Holy Week and Easter season.